So, COVID has been described as a watershed event, and there's no denying that it's once a century event. It is a very defining moment in human history. But in the pre-COVID days, at least in the pre-Trump days, the buzzword really was globalization. Perhaps the very opposite of what we're trying to discuss today, economic nationalism. So let me start, to set things in context. Let me start by asking each of our panelists in turn, how would you define economic nationalism? And let me start with you, Samira.
I would try to argue that this concept of deglobalization, which has led to this economic nationalism, has actually started somewhere in the 2007-8 period and cannot be directly attributed to the Trump period. It started much before that. And if you look at even some simple measures like imports plus exports to GDP ratio, or if you look at financial sector integration through global cross-border assets, you would see those curves, they peak out around that 2007-8 period. And after that, it has been on a consistent decline. And economic nationalism followed this trend with a little bit of a lag.
So would you agree with Samir and Siddharth that economic nationalism on those two issues, A, that it started much before Trump, and B, that the West, particularly the advanced countries, are not happy with all aspects of economic nationalism? Capital, fine, but not labor.
So I think what happens is that when societies embrace a global order that is fair, that benefits every layer in society, countries are better off. Economic nationalism, the most extreme form is autarky. And I think that debate has been settled long time back, that no country, especially the country imposing it, is going to be better off. For this to succeed, the country has to be able to articulate the final destination. It has to be able to implement a transition to that destination, how the population embraces it and the benefits from the global order. And I think where nationalism starts is when society, government, businesses, as they embrace it, they are not able to support those who are negatively affected. And when that begins to increase, economic nationalism begins to take hold. It's not so much that it is nationalism, but it's a reaction to the effects of globalization, and it's a reaction to the public sector not being prepared for it.
Is it possible to merge economic identities, as in the case of the European Union, for instance, while still retaining separate political identities?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about nationalism is economic nationalism is that people try to blame foreigners for problems at home, right? If you think about trade or you think about immigration, even with trade, those are goods produced by foreigners. So, so indirectly you are kind of attacking foreigners. A lot of the economic nationalism that you see now is also kind of happening in the presence of economic conservatism, in the sense that, low income taxes, low corporate taxes, at the same time, low social spending, right? And Siddharth mentioned that, it's because, with trade, trade creates winners and losers at the same time. And when you cannot compensate the losers, that's when you have this backlash and you get economic nationalism. But in many countries, especially the US, there aren't enough social protection. So if you look at countries like Canada or Germany, where they have welfare state, a strong welfare state and social protection, you're not seeing that kind of economic nationalism as you're seeing, for example, in the US, at least during Trump's term.
So, Abadu, would you say that the government's Atmanirbhar program, as it is stands right now, is that an example of economic nationalism?
So to answer your question, yes, in short, my sense of economic nationalism is basically globalization meets technology. So initially, remember, I mean, with the US facilitating China's entry into the WTO, etc. I mean, this generated a wave of benefits for all everywhere. I mean, all over the world. I mean, prices dropped, things became more affordable. A huge range of relatively high quality, low cost things began to become available, and that was a very welcome move. But gradually, I mean, over a period of time, and this happened gradually. Over a period of time, people began to realize that there was an exodus of jobs in relatively protected economies out into the other developed China primarily, but other, I mean, ASEAN and the other economies. That's when the pinch began. Then over the last decade, maybe not even that, maybe even later, then with the advent of automation, technology, digital services, etc., so all of that, actual jobs began to be lost. That's when this process actually began. I mean, when I mean, this predates Trump, but that's the sequence of moves. Coming to India, I think some of the key characteristics of nationalism, of economic nationalism, were typically, I mean, the importance of state intervention over market mechanisms, etc. Focus on manufacturing, the quality of inputs, the process of inputs, and that, to my mind, definitely suggests is very redolent of what we hear of Atmanirbhar Bharat.
So, how does one resolve these two issues? Cooperation when necessary, at the same time, when the push comes to shove, economic nationalism once again to the forefront. Samiran.
Ultimately, if the benefits are not populating to the common man, then there will always be objection to any sort of economic cooperation. I don't think any political leader in any country or any European Union anywhere would be benevolent enough to do solve a game theoretic problem where it's good for world welfare that we do better cooperation. Everybody is going to be somewhat myopic in thinking that it should benefit that country and particularly the common man in that country. So ultimately, I think the test of globalization is going to be if it can demonstrate that a strategy of cooperation actually benefits the common man in every part of the world.
In today's context, I think the two major challenges ahead of us are both in the global commons, and economic nationalism will not solve it, cannot solve it, will not solve it, is pandemics and climate change. And no country can do it alone. Setting out fair rules by which nations cooperate, allow for a transition through the two biggest challenges in front of us right now is the only way forward.
The COVID pandemic actually underscores the need for global cooperation. Because if you had more global cooperation, you wouldn't be having shortage of PPEs and things like that, or and as I said, you need information to flow from one part of the world to another.
One thing I need to mention is that we need to create an ecosystem that creates jobs. That's the ultimate source of equity that will come about in the system. I mean, and whatever we do, I mean, whichever equilibrium we finally gravitate towards, that has to be an employment creating equilibrium. And so really, I mean, with each passing day, it's becoming more and more difficult, but that's the political economy that we need to do.